A man named Seaman begins by asking a woman called Katerina if she knows that Tillman Castle, the fortress visible in the distance, has never once been conquered throughout its 200-year history. Katerina looks confused and asks why he's suddenly bringing that up, reminding him that they need to leave because they were never supposed to be there in the first place. Seaman reassures her, saying nobody should be around right now. Katerina still insists she has to return to finish her cleaning duties, but Seaman tells her it'll only take a moment because he really wanted her to see the scenery from this spot. He explains that the view looks especially beautiful at this hour of the day. Katerina questions why any of it matters, pointing out that the land belongs to nobles anyway, and people like them could never live there. Seaman then excitedly reveals that he may actually be able to buy a house in that area someday, because he's expected to be promoted to an intermediate mage. He explains that he recently submitted a thesis about a newly designed golem, and his senior mages praised the work highly. They even told him that if the elder approves it too, his promotion would almost certainly happen. He admits the house wouldn't be large, but says it would still be enough for the two of them to live peacefully and comfortably together. Katerina looks genuinely surprised by his words, and Seaman suddenly asks her to marry him. He tells her she's suffered for his sake all this time, but from now on he wants to make her happier than anyone else in the world. Katerina teases him a little, saying he should probably become an intermediate mage before making grand promises like that. Seaman complains that she's being cruel, causing her to laugh before admitting she's only joking. She says she never imagined a day like this would actually come for them. As she gently leans against his shoulder, Seaman reflects that he truly believed they could finally achieve happiness because he had worked so hard for it. That hopeful dream is immediately shattered when reality strikes. The elder of the Mage Tower steals Seaman's work and claims the golem thesis as his own. Another man praises the elder, declaring that the thesis will revolutionize the world. The elder modestly accepts the praise while speaking with the duke, pretending the achievement was only possible thanks to the duke's generous investments. Seaman overhears everything as his accomplishments are stolen right in front of him. Although the voices around him begin fading into the background, his anger grows stronger. He realizes his beliefs were naive. No matter how hard he works, he'll never receive recognition for his efforts. Instead, he'll simply continue wasting away while powerful people take everything from him. The Duke then asks the elder about a previous request he had made. The elder responds that he hasn't forgotten and asks whether the Duke is truly satisfied with her, considering she's merely a woman of low birth. At that moment, guards drag Katerina forcefully into the room. She's visibly frightened and appears to have already been roughed up. Seaman is shocked to see her there at all. The guards shove her toward the Duke, while Seaman finally reaches his breaking point, declaring that he's tired of powerful people trampling over others. The Duke comments that he had heard Katerina was famous for her beauty, and now he sees the rumors were true. The elder coldly remarks that if she had been born into nobility, her life would have been entirely different. Seaman's rage intensifies as he realizes that everything he struggled desperately to protect is being ripped away from him. He wonders how these people can act so casually while constantly destroying the lives of others. With tears in his eyes, Seaman begins preparing a magical attack and charges toward them, shouting that he won't allow Katerina to be taken from him. The elder becomes irritated and instantly retaliates with lightning magic. Calling Seaman a foolish brat, he asks whether he truly forgot his place, declaring that he's nothing more than trash before blasting him down with lightning. Seaman's glasses shatter as he collapses to the ground. Katerina cries out desperately, screaming for him to stand up again. All Seaman can do is weakly stretch out his hand toward her while she's dragged away from him. The scene fades to black. After a time skip, Seaman is shown kneeling in a prison cell, completely broken. Rats are his only companions, and his eyes have become lifeless and hollow. He mutters that there was nothing he could have done. He picks up one of the rats, causing it to panic violently. Marks scratched into the wall reveal he has been counting the days of his imprisonment. Two guards mock him while poking him with a spear, laughing that it looks like he's about to eat the rat. They joke that even a mage from the magic tower is worthless once reduced to such a pathetic state. They taunt him further, saying they'd free him immediately if he simply agreed to help summon the golem. Seaman gives no response, prompting them to wonder whether he's even listening anymore. One guard remarks that Seaman completely lost his mind after Katerina died. The guards then casually discuss Katerina's fate, revealing that she committed suicide after being sold to the Duke because she wanted to protect her purity. One of them even comments that it was a waste because she was too beautiful to die. Hearing this, Seaman bites into his own thumbnail until it tears off and blood begins dripping from his hand. Through trembling grief, he apologizes to Katerina for failing to protect her. As the guards walk away, they suddenly notice the rats behaving strangely. The creatures all stare upward as if waiting for something. One guard immediately senses danger and orders the other to kill one of the rats. The moment it's stabbed, a magical circle appears on the creature's stomach. The guards instantly realize the rats came from Seaman's cell and understand something terrible is happening. Using his own blood, Seaman begins drawing a massive magic circle across the prison floor. He quietly says that he was weak from the very beginning, but that will now change. The guards rush toward him, demanding he stop immediately, but Seaman refuses, declaring this is only the beginning. Once the magic circle is complete, he presses his palm against it and begins absorbing the life force of the surrounding rats. He says that if he had possessed greater strength from the start, Katerina never would have been taken from him. The rats positioned inside smaller circles sacrifice themselves one after another as their energy gathers at the center. A massive explosion erupts, destroying the prison cell. When the smoke clears, Seaman stands free with an enormous golem towering behind him, the same golem design stolen from his thesis. Looking at the terrified guards, Seaman remarks that they now were the same expression Katerina once had. The golem swipes through the guards effortlessly, slaughtering them before smashing through the prison walls. Seaman reflects that he spent so long searching for a reason to remain alive, but now he finally understands. He exists to take revenge on the world that denied him and Katerina the happy life they deserved together. Soon, more golems begin rampaging throughout the Mage Tower. As Seaman walks through the destruction, he tells Katerina there's no reason for her to worry anymore, because he will never be weak again. No matter the cost, he'll obtain whatever power he can grasp. He swears he'll change everything. The Elder is later shown battling desperately with lightning magic as a massive shadow suddenly falls over him. It's Seaman riding atop the giant golem he created during his imprisonment. The Elder demands to know whether Seaman has gone insane, questioning why someone who once served God would resort to forbidden black magic and side with demons. Seaman responds with a cold, emotionless stare and asks why any of that matters anymore. Meanwhile, the Duke desperately tries to flee, begging Seaman to spare him. He claims he can make Seaman the ruler of the region and promises to fulfill any desire if his life is spared. Seaman extends his hand toward him and calmly states that the Duke possesses far less power than he believes. He then kills him without hesitation, declaring that no amount of power can bring the dead back to life. Seaman tells Katerina that the world which ruined them both will now suffer for her sake. Sometime later, a man named Lock-in is formally knighted by the king. It's revealed that Seaman's violent campaign has continued for years, and he has now become known as the Demon King. He has devastated countless territories, slaughtered innocent people, and already destroyed 2 entire kingdoms along with a duchy. The king pleads with Lock-in, the chosen hero, to save the world from the spreading darkness by defeating the Demon King once and for all. As imperial banners wave overhead, Lock-in raises his sword and addresses the gathered army. He proclaims that the glorious light of the Artania Empire is fading while the Demon King's shadow spreads across the Lojasia continent. However, they refuse to surrender. For the sake of their families and the future of the world, they will destroy the Demon King and become humanity's final hope. At this moment, another flashback appears. Katerina once asked Seaman if he heard about a child whose hand was cut off simply for stealing bread. Seaman nervously tells her to lower her voice before someone overhears. Katerina bitterly remarks that nobles can hand down such cruel punishments because they never understand hunger themselves. She questions why a child should suffer so severely simply because of the social class he was born into. Sadly, she says that people like them never chose the circumstances they were born into either. Filled with hope, Seaman responds that perhaps one day social status will no longer matter, and everyone will live equally and freely. Katerina softly replies that such a world won't come by simply waiting for it. She says people must become the change they wish to see. Otherwise, future generations will suffer exactly the same way. As Seaman becomes flustered and drops his books, he asks what she meant about the children they'll raise, pointing out they aren't even married yet. Katerina laughs and says that wasn't the important part of her message, though she casually adds that they're obviously going to get married anyway. Seaman panics and insists they will, but claims he isn't ready yet. Katerina playfully pressures him, asking whether he's truly going to marry her or not. He hurriedly confirms that of course he will. She sighs dramatically and calls him hopeless, teasing that he's so shy that she's probably the only woman who would ever agree to marry him. The flashback ends as Seaman stands before his massive Demon King castle. Speaking to Katerina, he says everything will soon be over. Although it took a long time, the world they dreamed of creating is finally within reach. In front of him stands Locken's enormous army. The soldiers march forward nervously, their faces filled with fear. Locken calls out to Seaman, declaring that the entire world has suffered because of him. Swearing in the name of God and justice, he promises that Seaman's evil deeds will finally be judged. At first, Seaman chuckles quietly, but his laughter soon erupts across the battlefield. He asks whether Locken truly believes he can judge him using God and justice. Seaman mocks the idea that he would fear a false god or the hypocritical justice upheld by the Empire. Locken declares that countless heroes stand beside him, and that together they will bring judgment upon the Demon King. He vows that today they will destroy the demon and save their world. Raising his weapon high, Locken charges forward, and the army storms ahead behind him. As the enemies begin closing in on him, Seaman demands to know who they think they are to pass judgment on him, declaring that he alone will be the one to judge. Ever since the day he lost Katerina, justice itself had died in his eyes. He drives his staff into the ground, causing a massive magic circle to spread beneath him. The soldiers rushing toward him suddenly appear frozen in place, as though time itself has stopped. Seaman coldly states that he no longer believes in false ideals like justice, and that he will show them the only truth he still believes in. In an instant, every soldier loses control of their body as their life force is violently drained into Seaman's ritual. Just like when he previously summoned his golems, the ritual completely consumes them, erasing them from existence. From the energy left behind by their corpses, giant golems emerge and roar loudly enough to force Locken to raise his guard. Seaman smirks as he tells him to witness it for himself, proclaiming, "Today is the birth of true justice." He orders Locken to abandon his fake faith because this day marks the dawn of a new age, one ruled entirely by him. In his new world, every noble in existence will be destroyed. Behind him stands a massive army of golems, and one of them suddenly lifts its enormous fist before grabbing several soldiers at once and crushing them into a bloody pulp. Watching their comrades get obliterated sends the remaining soldiers into panic, yet they realize retreat means certain doom anyway. Seaman gazes at them with faint sadness in his eyes before calling them fools. To him, they're nothing but trash clinging desperately to their status and titles while trying to oppose genuine power. Even so, he has no intention of sparing them. He vows that every last one of them will be wiped out. At that moment, Locken prepares to charge forward, shouting that Seaman's actions are unforgivable. A bright yellow aura envelopes his blade as he launches himself through the air, slicing directly through one of the golems and destroying it instantly. Seaman is shocked that Loken managed to eliminate it in a single strike, and realizes this must be why none of his previous golem invasions could conquer the Libya kingdom. It was all because of Loken. Seaman glares at him with pure disgust, while Loken's expression remains calm, as though he's simply doing what must be done. Seaman declares that Loken will die today, and a brutal war erupts between them, with Seaman commanding his golems, while Loken leads the human forces. Eventually, the battlefield falls into an eerie silence. Broken weapons cover the ground, and the earth itself is soaked with blood. Only Seaman and a single remaining golem are still standing, while Lon, completely exhausted, leans on his sword just to stay upright. Loken raises his head towards Seaman and announces that this ends now. Behind Seaman, the last golem slowly begins crumbling apart. As Loken raises his blade, Seaman cries out to him, insisting that he doesn't understand how corrupt and rotten the world truly is. Tears stream down his face as he bitterly claims that if Loken had not stopped him, he would have cleansed the world and rebuilt everything from the beginning. Filled with hatred, Seaman curses Loken, declaring that his entire bloodline will suffer for generations. His tears gradually turn to blood as Loken tightens his grip on his weapon and unleashes one final slash, pouring every last ounce of aura into the attack. The strike cleanly severs Seaman's head while simultaneously obliterating the remaining fragments of the golem behind him. As Seaman's head drifts through the air, his thoughts return to Katerina. He remembers her telling him that whenever he smiled beside her, all her worries disappeared. She confessed that those moments were when she felt happiest. Standing on her tiptoes, she gently held his face, kissed him, and told him she loved him. Those precious memories are what occupies Seaman's mind in his final moments. But suddenly, he jolts awake. Grabbing his throat in panic, he wonders if everything had only been a dream. Feeling that his head is still attached to his neck, he wipes sweat from his forehead and mutters about the terrible headache pounding through him. He notices there are no wounds on his body and becomes increasingly confused. Looking around at the unfamiliar room, he speculates that he may somehow be in another country. He questions how he could possibly still be alive, dismissing the idea of black magic entirely, since even forbidden magic shouldn't be capable of reviving the dead. If such magic existed, he would have already used it himself. His confusion deepens when he notices a portrait hanging on the wall. It depicts none other than Loken. Demanding to know why Loken's portrait is there, Seaman is interrupted as a butler suddenly enters the room. The man addresses him as young lord and expresses relief that he is finally awakened. He tightly hugs Seaman, explaining that everyone feared they had lost the final descendant of the Lon bloodline after he remained unconscious for 2 weeks. Completely bewildered, Seaman asks what the man means by young lord, and asks who he even is. The butler panics, wondering if Seaman truly cannot remember him. Falling to his knees, he blames himself for failing to care for him properly. Through tears, he explains that Seaman may have temporary memory loss from the accident and begins recounting basic information to refresh his memory. The butler reveals that he is Luke D. Lacan, heir to the Lacan Viscounty within the Baroque Empire and a direct descendant of the great hero Lon. Seaman freezes in shock, realizing this means he truly died 500 years ago and has now reincarnated into the bloodline of his greatest enemy, living half a millennium after his death. Sweating nervously, he suddenly bolts out of the room despite the butler shouting that he should not be moving in his condition. Muttering that none of this makes any sense, Seaman throws open a door leading to a balcony and stares out in disbelief. Towering before him is an enormous humanoid machine resembling a heavily armored golem. Staggering backward, Seaman questions whether the sight before him is even real. If such a machine exists, then everything the butler told him must be true. Judging by its complex structure alone, he can tell the weapon far surpasses traditional golem magic. Technology and magic he once could only dream about are now standing directly in front of him. The butler catches up to him, and Seaman asks for his name. The man introduces himself as Hans, Seaman's personal servant. Seaman then points toward the massive construct and asks exactly what it is. Hans explains that it is called a gigant, a giant humanoid weapon. Curious, Seaman asks if it was created using golem magic. Hans replies that he is partially correct because gigants are developed through advanced scientific hex tech combined with magic. Unlike traditional golems, which are controlled remotely, gigants are piloted directly from within by human operators. Seaman struggles to believe that someone can actually climb inside and control such a machine, but Hans assures him it is true. Seaman begins analyzing the concept in his head, realizing that piloting such a weapon would require incredible technological advancement. Yet if Hans is telling the truth, then it truly is a revolutionary weapon. A pilot inside the gigant would be protected from outside attacks, while also reacting much faster than someone controlling a golem remotely. It perfectly solves all the weaknesses Seaman once struggled with while using his own creations. Hans simply finds it surprising how fascinated Seaman suddenly seems. As Seaman walks back toward his room, Hans calls after him. Seaman quietly stops and mutters that if these machines truly exist, then 500 years must have genuinely passed. He wonders bitterly why he had to be reborn as the descendant of his greatest enemy. Later, Hans can be heard frantically chasing after him through the mansion while repeatedly shouting his name. Meanwhile, Seaman is standing atop a desk, aggressively drinking alcohol straight from the bottle. Hans begs him not to overexert himself, but Seaman simply wipes his mouth and looks down at him, repeating that he is truly a descendant of Lon. Hans confirms it, confused about why it matters so much. Seaman brushes it off, arrogantly claiming he should naturally be healthier than most people anyway. But moments later, a sharp pain suddenly tears through his body, forcing him to collapse to his knees while gasping for air. Hans quickly rushes over, reminding him that he warned him to be careful because of the curse. Confused, Seaman asks what curse he's talking about. Hans admits he suspected Seaman really had lost his memories before finally explaining. According to history, Lord Lochcan was celebrated as the hero who saved the world, but shortly afterward he died due to the Demon Lord's curse. Ever since then, every member of Lochcan's bloodline has supposedly suffered painful deaths at a young age. Seaman immediately recalls the final words he screamed at Lochcan before dying, when he angrily declared that his bloodline would suffer forever. Embarrassed, he realizes he only said those things out of frustration. He can't believe people actually interpreted it as a real curse lasting centuries. The story is then retold from history's perspective. 500 years ago, the peaceful world faced destruction at the hands of Seaman, the Demon Lord. Using terrifying dark magic, he could summon golems stronger than entire armies and slaughter countless soldiers effortlessly. Humanity seemed doomed until the righteous hero Lochcan defeated him and restored peace to the world. Yet before dying, the Demon Lord supposedly cursed Lochcan and all his descendants to suffer agonizing deaths. Closing the history book in irritation, Seaman complains that people completely twisted the story however they pleased. He insists he never cast an actual curse at all and questions whether a curse could realistically last 500 years anyway. Still, after thinking it over, he bitterly admits that losing the battle was ultimately his own fault. He wonders why fate forced him to reincarnate in a Lochcan's bloodline specifically, joking that he seems to be the truly cursed one here. Determined not to waste this second chance, Seaman grabs more books and begins studying the modern era. He refuses to remain in this pathetic state because he cannot face Katarina like this. The world continued existing for another 500 years after his death, meaning its corruption must have only worsened. He also believes not all his former followers could have been eradicated. For now, he decides he must learn everything he can about this era. If he can reunite with his followers, then this time he truly will change the world. The next day, the gigant still stands outside the mansion, while Seaman remains buried in books upstairs. After finishing another one, he downs even more alcohol while muttering that finding his old followers is probably impossible. Worse yet, despite once terrifying the world, people have almost entirely forgotten him after 500 years. There is barely any trace left of his existence. On top of that, his current body possesses almost no mana or physical stamina whatsoever. Frustrated, he wonders what he can possibly accomplish in such a weak state. As he gets up to move, he twists his ankle and crashes face first on the floor. Clenching his fist in despair, Seaman cries out to Katerina, asking if he is destined to fail in this life as well. All he ever wanted was a world where everyone could live equally and peacefully. Suddenly, loud shouting echoes from downstairs as someone calls for the young master. Startled, Seaman wonders what all the commotion is about. Walking out onto the balcony, he hears a furious man demanding to know how much longer the young master plans to avoid them. The man announces to Hans and the gathered servants that he and the other merchants refuse to leave until they speak directly with the young master. Introducing himself as Darren, branch manager of the Allen Merchant Association, he angrily reveals that Seaman borrowed 30,000 pesos the previous year to fund development of mine and has been dodging repayment ever since. Darren demands to know whether Seaman ever truly planned to pay the debt back, shouting that he can't continue dealing with this situation any longer. Hans steps in, explaining that the young master is still recovering and needs rest, assuring Darren they'll eventually find another way to settle the debt. Darren refuses to accept that excuse, insisting the young master handle the issue personally. As the tension rises, Darren notices the worried looks on Hans and the others' faces and realizes Seaman likely has no way to repay the money at the moment. Still, Darren presents what he calls a reasonable alternative. Instead of money, why not hand over the Gigant station at the manor? Since it's second-hand, he argues it probably isn't even worth the full 30,000 pesos, meaning he's already offering them favorable terms. One of the men immediately protests, yelling that such a thing is impossible. The household only possesses 3 Gigants total, and they're vital to protecting their land. The Knight Commander, Rogers, firmly declares that he will never allow it. If Darren wants the Gigant, he says he'll have to kill him first because their defenses depend on it. Hans quickly tells Rogers to calm down while the accountant, Dixon, proposes a different solution, temporarily increasing taxes. Hans lets out a frustrated sigh and asks if Dixon truly understands how desperate the people already are. The citizens barely have enough to survive, so taking more from them would only worsen things. Dixon argues that, regardless, surrendering the Gigant is still the only realistic option. Rogers once again shouts that it will never happen. At that moment, Seaman suddenly laughs and sarcastically remarks, "What a wonderful household this is." He adds that Locken would probably turn in his grave if he saw this. Darren attempts to ease the atmosphere, explaining that while he does want the Gigant, he also doesn't want people accusing him of robbing the home of a legendary hero. He points toward the machine and casually asks if he can simply take it with him. Rogers angrily asks whether Darren is mocking them, reminding him that he already said no. Darren then clarifies that they misunderstood him. He isn't referring to the Gigant at all. He's talking about the magic tower standing behind it. Everyone is caught off guard by the suggestion. Rogers even admits the magic tower would be a far better trade than the Gigant. Hans comments that nobody uses the tower anymore anyway, while Dixon explains they once made a little money from it as a tourist attraction, though now it serves no purpose. Seaman turns to look at the structure and instantly recognizes it as his old magic tower. He's stunned that Locken built the estate directly on the place where Seaman himself had once died. He recalls that 500 years earlier, the land where the tower now stands had been the home he shared with Katerina. It was small, old, and run down, but it belonged to them. Despite its condition, it held countless cherished memories. To the two of them, it had been a peaceful place where they dreamed about the future together. Meanwhile, Darren continues speaking, explaining that the land surrounding the Demon Tower now falls within his company's sphere of influence. Seaman's anger begins boiling over as he silently fumes over their audacity in targeting that location. Darren keeps rambling confidently, saying his company has the resources to transform the tower into a thriving tourist destination, which would supposedly revitalize the region's economy. He even starts laughing at the idea. Dixon immediately asks where he should sign, but both Hans and Rogers remain visibly uneasy. Suddenly, the door slams open with tremendous force, startling everyone as Seaman storms out, radiating fury. Hans nervously asks if he should really be walking around in his condition, but Seaman shoots him a cold glare and orders him to move aside. Darren greets him smugly, saying it was difficult to finally meet him and mentioning that his company will now take over management of the Demon Tower. Seaman coldly asks whether Darren only knows how to babble nonsense, and whether he even understands the significance of the place he's trying to seize. His rage is unmistakable as he stares Darren down and demands to know how he dares claim ownership over something that belongs to him. Darren and his men immediately grow uneasy, shocked by how intense and intimidating Seaman is compared to the rumors they'd heard. Darren attempts to explain himself, but Seaman cuts him off, calling him a fraud and ordering him to shut up. He exposes Darren's true motives, accusing him of using development as an excuse to seize the land located at the center of the territory so he can gradually expand his influence and authority. Darren visibly panics after being called out so directly and hurriedly claims Seaman's accusations are absurd. Seaman dismisses him as pathetic, mocking the fact that his company can't even properly sell secondhand weapons, yet he's trying to annex an entire territory. He declares that among incompetent people, the ones he despises most are those rotten to the core. Realizing he's losing control of the conversation, Darren decides he has to respond more aggressively. He shouts that the Lockton household is drowning in debt, and he was only trying to show consideration by offering them a compromise. His company deserves repayment somehow, and he demands to know whether that's unreasonable. Seaman bluntly asks why Darren assumes they won't repay the debt at all. He confidently declares that within 10 days, every cent, including the interest, will be paid back. Then, releasing an overwhelming wave of killing intent, he screams at Darren and his men to get out of his sight. The pressure completely freezes them in place. One of the men even hiccups from fear before Darren and his crew hurriedly retreat onto their wagon and leave. Before departing, Darren bitterly says he looks forward to seeing Seaman actually back up his words. After they're gone, Seaman mutters that men like Darren are all the same. Rogers, meanwhile, is stunned that Seaman is even standing after everything that happened. He calls out to him in disbelief over what he just witnessed. Confused, Seaman asks what the issue is. Instantly, Hans, Dixon, and Rogers salute him with tears in their eyes, deeply moved by his actions. Hans praises him for immediately seeing through Darren's scheme. Rogers says that watching him defend his ancestors and their honor with such fury was incredible. He even claims that, for a moment, he saw the image of the great hero Lockton within Seaman himself. Seaman reacts in disbelief, wondering why they keep comparing him to Lockton and thinking that at this rate he may actually become the Demon King again from sheer frustration. Hans then asks the obvious question: how exactly does Seaman plan to repay such a massive debt? Seaman replies that first he needs to understand what 30,000 pesos is truly worth. Hans explains that the amount could purchase 10,000 sacks of wheat and is roughly equivalent to the price of a single unit of the newer warrior-class Gigant. He also adds that the household currently lacks enough collateral to secure loans from banks or other lenders. When Hans asks if Seaman actually has a plan, Seaman dismisses the explanation, saying it doesn't help him much. He tells them that if they have nothing more useful to say, they should step aside and leave the debt repayment to him. According to Seaman, they can simply sit back and relax while he handles it personally. Seaman then begins inspecting the estate for himself. As he walks through the manor, he notices just how empty everything is. The building is practically falling apart, resources are scarce, and even their food supply is alarmingly low. Back in his office, Seaman angrily throws papers into the air and shouts, "Wasn't this the household that defeated the Demon King? Then why the hell is there absolutely nothing here?" He even accuses Hans and the others of stealing everything. Hans quickly denies it, asking why he would ever do something like that. He explains that Seaman would understand the situation if he simply examined the family genealogy. Annoyed, Seaman asks why he would need to look through something like that, so Hans finally explains the household's history. After Lochcan defeated the Demon King, he was granted the title of Marquis and established his territory in the southern region of the Livia Kingdom. However, Duke Baroque later incited a rebellion against the kingdom, and Viscount Lochcan chose to oppose him because he couldn't tolerate the injustice being committed. Unfortunately, Lochcan was still suffering from the curse left behind by the Demon King, and as a result, he suffered a devastating defeat. Following that loss, his title was stripped away, and he was exiled to the borderlands, where his health rapidly deteriorated until he eventually passed away. Seaman remarks that it sounds as though Lochcan never truly wanted to live by the tower, and was instead forced into it. He then points out that, beyond everything else, the family's financial condition is terrible, questioning how they've even managed to survive for the last 500 years. Hans looks uneasy before admitting there's a reason behind it all. He explains that his ancestors desperately hoped the family could one day reclaim its former prestige. In pursuit of that dream, they were willing to sacrifice everything they had: their wealth, influence, authority, and every remaining asset. Their only goal was restoring the honor of the household. However, because of the curse that had been passed down through each generation, all their efforts ended in failure no matter how hard they struggled. In the end, the household that once belonged to the hero who saved the world slowly collapsed into ruin. Hans adds that Seaman may not remember this, but the reason he was unconscious for over half a month was because of the Gigan incident. He had been working non-stop in an attempt to rebuild the family's reputation, trying to prove he possessed the qualities worthy of a hero, but he pushed himself far beyond his limits. Seaman quietly reflects on this before rising from his chair and walking toward the window. Hans tells him they've reached a dead end and apologizes sincerely, saying that even as a member of the household, there's nothing he can do to help. Despite that, he vows that even if he has to risk his own life, he'll somehow gather enough money to repay the debt. At that moment, Seaman suddenly comes up with an idea. He tells Hans there's no need to go that far, because he's figured something out. As long as they repay the money, it shouldn't matter how they obtain it. The scene abruptly shifts to the sound of a woman screaming. Hans and everyone else inside the mansion are left utterly shocked. Rogers is even in tears, unable to understand how this could have happened. Hans panics, saying no one could have imagined that Seaman would take the statue of Hero Lochcan and sell it off. Hans says the statue had still been there yesterday, and wonders how it could have disappeared overnight. Then he suddenly realizes the young lord is nowhere to be found, and says he has to inform him immediately. A guard rushes over in a hurry, announcing that there's been a serious problem. Hans says he doesn't care about the statue right now and demands to know where the young lord is. The guard explains that Seaman slipped away while security was at its weakest point. Hans collapses to his knees, wondering what on earth Luke could possibly be planning. The story then cuts to Seaman riding in a carriage with the statue of Lochcan loaded on board. The carriage driver speaks up carefully, saying he has a question if it isn't too rude. Seaman casually agrees, but asks who exactly he is. The man awkwardly laughs, surprised Seaman forgot him. He is introduced as Philip, a guard knight serving him. Philip asks whether Seaman truly intends to sell the statue. Seaman bluntly replies yes, adding that it should fetch a decent price once it's melted down. Philip protests, saying the statue may simply look valuable, but it carries 500 years of the family's history. Seaman props one foot onto the carriage and asks whether 5 centuries of history are somehow supposed to feed them. Philip points out that selling the statue alone still won't be enough to clear all their debts. Seaman explains that it's only one step in a larger plan. Relieved to hear that, Philip says he's sure everyone will forgive them as long as the debt gets repaid, then asks what the plan actually is. After thinking for a moment, Seaman casually reveals that he plans to use the money from selling the statue to gamble for the rest of the funds. Philip instantly freezes and halts the carriage, saying he thought Seaman actually had a strategy, but this sounds more like a complete disaster waiting to happen. Seaman calls him annoying and asks why he bothered coming along if all he planned to do was lecture him. Philip reminds him that Seaman dragged him out before sunrise, and if he had known this was the idea, he never would have agreed to leave. He urges Seaman to turn back, beg for forgiveness, and think of a better solution. Seaman calls him an idiot and tells him to think carefully. If they return now, he'll have to explain why he stole the statue of their great predecessor. And if he admits it was for gambling, there's no way the family would forgive him. In fact, he'd probably be thrown out of the household entirely. Philip is stunned by this realization. Seaman smirks and points out that since he's still the young lord, the one likely to be kicked out would probably be Philip instead. Laughing, he tells Philip to choose wisely. Would he rather become a penniless wanderer or stand beside the hero who restores honor to the household? Once again, Seaman urges him to make the smart choice. Clearly nervous, Philip struggles internally before reluctantly agreeing to continue forward. Seaman praises him for making the right decision. Philip sighs and comments that he heard Seaman's personality changed after waking from his coma, but now he feels like the man has practically become the devil himself. Eventually, they arrive at a bustling port city with only 5 minutes left before departure. The captain announces the final boarding call, and Philip hesitantly asks whether they're really getting on the ship. Seaman asks if he still wants to turn back, causing Philip to hurriedly guide him on board instead. The moment they step onto the ship, the departure bell rings. The captain calls out that it's time to set sail, and soon the vessel begins cutting through the ocean. Later that night, they finally reach a city called Lamer and dock at the port. A pouch of money is tossed into Philip's hands, and he immediately starts complaining, demanding to know if that tiny amount is really all they're being paid. Seaman tells him to stop whining and lead the way. Philip insists they could have negotiated for more, but Seaman says the amount is good enough. As they head deeper into the area, Philip notices how different everything looks and asks whether Seaman has been there before. Seaman says only briefly, though the place was nothing like this back then. He remembers it as little more than a deserted island, because a kraken constantly blocked the surrounding seas. Letting out a sigh, he remarks that 500 years really have passed. Shaking off his gloomy thoughts, Seaman says coming here was definitely the right decision. Philip becomes more energetic, explaining that while he doesn't know Seaman's exact reason for choosing this place, it's now the second largest city in the Empire's southern region. Since magic engineering advanced over the years, the once isolated island gradually transformed into a thriving population center after the sea monster threat was overcome. Naturally, gambling became one of the city's biggest attractions. Philip asks one last time whether Seaman is truly confident about this. Seaman responds that if he lacked confidence, he never would have bothered making the trip. Standing in front of the casino, Seaman tells Philip it's finally time to head inside. Philip nervously asks for a moment to prepare himself. Seaman questions why he's making such a big deal out of it, but Philip asks how Seaman can stay so calm when gambling is involved and wonders if he actually knows some foolproof way to win. Seaman replies that when it comes to gambling, mindset is everything. Moments later, a man's voice rings out, saying that doesn't seem to be working very well. It turns out Seaman has been losing every single bet he's placed. He's asked whether he wants to keep playing, and Seaman lets out an uneasy laugh, wondering if things are really going to unfold this way. The man who has been winning non-stop grins and says fortune must be favoring him today. Seaman calmly replies that luck itself is also a kind of skill. The man chuckles, calling him incredibly generous and saying it's an honor to gamble against such an impressive young noble. Still, he points out that he seems to have run out of cash and asks if they should call the game here. Seaman immediately refuses and orders Philip to convert all of their remaining funds into coins. Philip protests, warning him that if they lose this round too, they'll end up completely bankrupt. Seaman tells him not to hesitate and to bring everything over. Across the table, the man comments that Seaman seems irritated and says today must truly be his lucky day. Without hesitation, Seaman pushes all of his coins forward and declares that he's betting everything, going all in on the next hand. Philip begins lamenting dramatically, convinced their family is finished. The gambler across from Seaman asks if he's actually serious, admitting that this is the first time he's ever had a streak this good, though Seaman must have confidence if he's willing to risk it all. Seaman answers that worrying about the outcome won't change the results anyway. The man praises his nerve and asks if they should reveal their cards. At the same time, he secretly exchanges signals with the woman standing behind Seaman. Confidently, he flips his hand over and boasts that the goddess of luck is clearly on his side as he reaches for Seaman's money. But Seaman stops him, saying he still needs to reveal his own cards. As he slowly turns them over, he remarks that, surprisingly, this is the hand he ended up with. The man stares in disbelief, unable to understand how it's possible. Seaman smirks and says that unexpected turnarounds are what make gambling entertaining, adding that it was an enjoyable match. He extends his hand for a handshake while Philip bursts into tears, claiming he knew Seaman would pull through all along. The gambler suddenly slams his fist against the table, shouting that it's impossible and demanding to know what kind of tricks Seaman used to get those cards. Seaman innocently asks what he means, then casually suggests that perhaps he's referring to the people behind him secretly signaling information about his hand. The man immediately breaks into a nervous sweat, shocked that Seaman figured it out. Seaman asks if there was ever any chance he wouldn't notice. Every spectator nearby was one of the man's subordinates, secretly switching and relaying cards during the match. But Seaman intentionally played along because he needed to touch each card at least once. He had placed tiny traces of mana on them, since he can manipulate anything carrying those mana marks. Controlling a handful of cards is effortless for someone who once commanded an entire army of golems. Compared to that, managing a card game is child's play. He explains that he could have won without relying on any flashy tricks at all. Laughing, Seaman tells the man to hurry up and admit defeat already. However, the man coldly announces that their business for the day is over and orders everyone in the casino to teach the young lord some proper manners. Around the room, people begin drawing weapons. Seaman sighs and wonders why these idiots are still exactly the same, even after 500 years. Even though he no longer possesses the overwhelming mana reserves he once had, dealing with weaklings like them is still no problem. Energy begins gathering in his hand as he tells them to come at him already. Just as the attackers rush toward him, Philip urgently yells for Seaman to duck. In one swift motion, Philip unsheathes his blade, shattering several enemy weapons and blasting their owners backward. He furiously demands how they dare point swords at the sole heir of the Locken family, declaring that by doing so, they've already wagered their lives. The gambler turns pale with terror, trembling as he admits he has committed a crime worthy of death. Philip harshly tells him to shut up, demanding to know how he dared threaten the young lord in the first place. Watching all this unfold, Seaman suddenly realizes the situation might not be so terrible after all. Later on, Philip is seen carrying a huge sack of money while complaining about how unbelievably heavy it is, estimating there must be well over 10,000 pesos inside. Seaman says that should be obvious. Looking back at Philip, he admits he originally thought of him as nothing more than a porter, but Philip turned out to be far more capable than expected. Even so, Seaman notes that although today's profits were decent, causing such chaos means they probably won't be welcome in gambling houses anymore. He asks Philip if there are any other ways to make money. After thinking for a moment, Philip suggests visiting the Gigant Arena. Curious, Seaman asks what that is. Philip explains that just as people once held arenas where humans fought one another, there are now arenas where gigants battle each other instead. Depending on the matchups, the betting payouts can vary greatly, but if things go well, someone could make 30,000 pesos or even more. Seaman becomes interested immediately. Since gigants are developed using golem magic, he thinks his own knowledge may help him predict the winners. Philip confidently tells him to trust him because he used to be one of the top students at the Imperial Military Gigant Academy. Seaman tells him to lead the way, and Philip happily rushes ahead, insisting Seaman should appreciate his talents more. As they make their way toward the arena, they suddenly hear guards nearby mocking and abusing a group of people. They soon discover a crowd of children being kicked and stomped on by the guards, who angrily shout that maybe the kids will only learn after they're dead. Philip is horrified, questioning how anyone could treat children so cruelly. But Seaman's thoughts drift elsewhere. Even though the world has changed over the past 500 years, he realizes some things have remained exactly the same. In fact, some parts of society have only grown more rotten and corrupt over time. Clenching his teeth in anger, Seaman calls out to the guards and orders them to stop. But before he can step in, another voice interrupts first, demanding they cease immediately. The guards turn around and ask who dares interfere. A woman approaches and identifies herself as a member of the royal guard. She questions why men tasked with protecting the kingdom's citizens are instead using violence against helpless children. While she continues speaking, Seaman is overwhelmed by an entirely different storm of emotions rising within him. When he stares at her, she looks exactly like Katerina. She insists that the children deserve protection too, making him question whether she might have been reincarnated as well. The guards respond that even if she truly is a princess, resisting them is pointless because the order came directly from the Count himself. They remind her that she should understand how uneasy the citizens have become because of the constant influx of refugees. Reina challenges them, asking if they honestly think it is acceptable to confine people like livestock in conditions unfit for survival. She points out that these are innocent children who have already lost both their homeland and their families. And if anyone should bear responsibility, then she should be punished first. After all, as the princess of the Volga kingdom, she herself is also a refugee seeking shelter there. The guards warn her that continuing this behavior will only create more trouble. They explain they are not acting out of personal desire, but simply carrying out orders. Philip comments that the situation is becoming dangerous and asks Seaman whether this is really fine. Seaman asks if he realizes who the girl is. Philip answers that of course he does. She is widely known throughout the Volga kingdom as the princess who barely pays attention to the judgmental eyes of nobles. He says he heard rumors about the kingdom's downfall, but never imagined he would one day see a princess in circumstances like these. Her name, they reveal, is Reina. Meanwhile, Seaman remains completely stunned. No matter how many times he looks at her, she is undeniably Katerina in his eyes, and he cannot understand how she could look identical even if reincarnation were real. The guards apologize to Reina, but insist they cannot let her interfere. One of them grabs her by the arms, and as she protests, he shoves her aside with enough force to knock her to the ground. At that moment, something inside Seaman breaks. He lunges at the guard instantly, yelling for him to take his filthy hands off her. His bruised knuckles are visible as he beats the man mercilessly. Seaman declares that even if the world changes and time moves on, some people still need to be taught lessons every single day. He rages that scum like them only understand violence, and that no matter what happens, people like this will always exist, which deeply disgusts him. Ray suddenly grabs onto his arm and desperately begs him to stop, insisting there's no reason to go this far. Seaman almost calls her Katerina before catching himself. Another guard angrily demands to know how he dares attack them while drawing his weapon. The guard warns that Seaman must not fear imperial law. Philip calmly steps in and asks whether that law is truly more important than the guard's own life, while pressing a blade against his throat. The man immediately panics and backs away with his companion, shouting that they will regret this before fleeing the scene. Philip clicks his tongue and jokes that this feels straight out of a Chinese manhwa, saying he is surprised they did not accuse them of courting death. Seaman turns back toward Reina, though he accidentally calls her Katerina again, and anxiously asks if she is hurt. He apologizes for losing control and says he should have protected her sooner. Reina apologizes as well, but cautiously asks who exactly he is. Confused, Seaman asks what she means. Clearly unsettled by his violent outburst, she tells him that even if his appearance has changed, there is still little difference between him and the guards if both sides resort to violence. Seaman attempts to explain himself, but she cuts him off and clarifies that he must have mistaken her for someone else. Her name is not Katerina, it is Reina, just as the guards had already said. Philip quickly smooths things over, saying the young lord simply misunderstood the situation and assuring her they are not suspicious people while casually rambling on. Seaman, however, stares silently at his own hands, his eyes filling with sorrow. He reflects on how he endured endless loneliness knowing Katerina would never return. Yet he nearly lost himself simply because someone resembled her so closely. An older man then arrives, calling out to Reyna and asking what she is doing there. He reminds her that she had important obligations today and complains about how difficult it was to track her down. This man is revealed to be her butler, Victor. Reyna tries to explain, but Victor immediately becomes irritated, asking if she has been confronting the guards again. He then notices Seaman and Philip and asks who they are. Victor politely apologizes, explaining that tensions are high because of the current circumstances and requesting that they avoid getting too close to the princess. Seaman snaps back, calling that ridiculous. Even if he misunderstood the situation and escalated things, he still helped them in the end. He says he did not expect a reward, but at the very least she could have thanked him. Ray appears thoughtful for a moment, but Seaman abruptly tells Philip it is time to leave. As the two walk away, Reyna and Victor watch them go. Victor says they should leave as well, and Reyna quietly admits he is right, though she regrets not properly thanking him. The scene then shifts to the Gigan Arena, which honestly does not even look large enough to contain giant combatants like these. The commentators hype up the intensity of the ongoing battle, while Philip and Seaman sit among the crowd. By the time they reach their seats, Seaman casually remarks that the fight is already over. Moments later, one of the Gigants collapses after taking a decisive strike. The audience erupts in cheers as Adolf is declared the winner. Philip is shocked that Seaman predicted the result again. He excitedly says that at this rate, they will clear all their debt and become rich. Seaman explains that it is simple for him because Gigants are built using golem magic, allowing him to read the flow of mana and determine the likely victor with ease. The announcers then declare that the next battle is expected to be a complete bloodbath, Savage versus Sting. Philip confidently assumes Seaman can predict this one too and asks how Sting, with a record of 1 win and 5 losses, could possibly defeat Savage, who boasts 28 wins and only 2 losses. Seaman responds that while victory is technically possible despite such a massive difference in strength, this match should normally be straightforward. The commentators introduce the fighters as Savage enters the arena wielding dual axes. The pilot controlling Savage is a man named Brian, but Seaman's attention is suddenly caught by the opposing Gigant when it steps forward. The crowd refers to it as the Lucky Gigant, with the announcers explaining that it barely scraped by with a miracle victory in its previous match. Philip remarks that Sting's luck has run out because now it has to face Savage. Sting's pilot is introduced as Karen. However, Seaman becomes intrigued and suddenly declares that they need to bet everything on Sting. Philip is baffled and insists Savage is guaranteed to win. But Seaman sees something completely different through the flow of mana. Sting possesses far greater potential than everyone realizes. The battle begins as Savage hurls its axe through the air, only for Sting to block the attack cleanly. The commentators are shocked, wondering what is happening as Sting displays an unexpectedly strong performance. The audience, who anticipated a brutal one-sided defeat, is stunned as Sting successfully blocks every incoming strike from Savage. Savage laughs, admitting he initially thought his opponent was just an amateur, but now recognizes that they have genuine skill. Still, he says it is nowhere near enough before unleashing a devastating blow that tears one of Sting's arms clean off. The spectators gasp in disbelief. Even Philip cannot understand how this happened. Seaman is equally confused because, based on the mana flow, Sting should clearly have the advantage. Yet for some reason, its pilot is barely using mana at all. Savage laughs arrogantly and tells Sting to stand back up, pointing out that its legs are still functional. He mockingly says that if they no longer intend to fight, then the only mercy he can offer is a quick and painless defeat. As he raises his axe into the air, Philip starts to panic, asking what they're going to do, as all their money is about to be lost. Everyone watches as Savage's axe comes in directly towards Sting. Sting's eyes start to light up as they finally use their mana, but maybe it's too late. Savage's axe comes straight into the ground, shattering it. But then we see there's actually nothing underneath. Sting asks if he's aware that you can adjust your bed, and Gigant matches up until 30 seconds into the match. And now that the time frame has passed, they can't afford to pay for any more repairs than this. Sting sticks their hand out as a magic circle forms and uses an ability called Fire Blast, a straight-up flamethrower on Savage, lighting him ablaze. The Shoutcasters wonder how this could be, saying they have an unprecedented event happening here. Their champion, who bested the odds of 20-1 with pure skill, has now been crowned as Savage's Gigant falls to the ground. Philip starts to scream, saying that he believed in them the entire time, but Seaman is just surprised that they actually used magic, saying there's no way this should be possible. Philip asks what he's so confused about, saying Sting's rider Karen must have just been a rune knight. It's not too common to see Gigants using magic, but they must have been hiding their strength to raise the odds. Seaman says that's not what's important. The fundamental theory behind using magic through weaponry is something he developed, and that method, no matter how much time has passed, cannot be replicated by others. That's all because it's a process he completed with the use of black magic. We are taken to the hangar for the Gigant. Philip asks what they're doing there, saying they need to head back as soon as they can, but Seaman tells him to shut up, saying that he's busy thinking, and Philip's not helping at all. We then hear Victor telling Reyna that she can still change her mind, asking how she's going to go into a match with a Gigant like this. He says this isn't even a fight she should have accepted in the first place. Ray says that a mercenary like Andre would have no trouble riding Mir to fight the Count's Gigant. Both Philip and Seaman wonder what exactly is going on. Victor continues asking why she would agree to such a rash duel, saying that she'll need to marry the Count if she loses. This is not a decision you can take lightly, he says. She replies that she made her choice carefully. If she didn't accept, countless refugees would starve to death. In order to save everybody, this is the only way.